The desert sun scorched Fort Despair, baking the cracked earth until it resembled old leather. Dust swirled, clinging to boots, bonnets, and the raw cheeks of Alara Vance, who stood on the gallows with a noose grazing the nape of her neck. Her hands were bound tightly behind her, the rope biting her wrists, but her hazel eyes burned with defiance no heat could quell. At 25, Alara, a mapmaker for the Territorial Geological Survey, faced death for a crime she didn't commit, stealing a sacred Apache land chart from Judge Silas Gideon's vault. Below, a crowd of 40, ranchers, blacksmiths, wives with children peering from store windows, watched in uneasy silence. Fort Despair hadn't seen a hanging in 4 years, and Gideon intended to make this one unforgettable. His voice thundered across the square, white beard swaying like a false prophet's scripture. Alara Vance, you stand convicted of treason and theft, betraying this community and our peace with the Apache tribes. Alara's knees trembled, not from fear but fury. She'd been in Gideon's study the night the map vanished, correcting border coordinates, when she saw his wife, Evelyn, slip out with something wrapped in silk. From the shadows, Alara watched Evelyn bury it near the old pecan tree. The map wasn't stolen, it was hidden, a setup. But who would believe a surveyor over a God-fearing judge? Garrett Shaw, the lanky executioner, tested the trapdoor with his boot. It groaned under Alara's weight. Her heart pounded, climbing her throat, vying with the rope for space. She closed her eyes, seeking a prayer, but found only dust and silence. She'd never betrayed anyone, walked miles with blistered feet, slept with her compass clutched like a crucifix, charting land for safe settlement. Now, she faced death for uncovering too much truth. Gideon drew his pocket watch, its silver glinting like a mirror to damnation. His gray eyes met hers, cold and satisfied. He snapped it shut and nodded to Garrett, who reached for the lever. Then, clink, clink, clink. Spurs, slow and deliberate, cut the stillness. Heads turned. A figure emerged from the square's edge, swaying, coat frayed, hat bent, the color of old coffee. He looked like a drunk, but his steps carried purpose, each echoing like thunder. Gideon's eyes narrowed. This is a solemn proceeding. Step down or be arrested. The stranger blinked slowly. This what y'all call justice, he slurred. Hanging a woman for something she didn't do? Murmurs rippled. Captain Benedict, hand on his revolver, stepped forward. You're interrupting the law, mister. Back away. The stranger steadied. I got no quarrel with the law, just with liars in robes. He reached into his coat. Garrett flinched, Benedict gripped his gun. But it was no weapon, a tarnished badge, federal marshal, erratory appointed. A gasp swept the crowd. Gideon stepped back. The man raised the badge, catching the light. Name's Clay Callahan, and I ain't here to watch a woman die for speaking the truth. His eyes met Alara's, not pity, but recognition, a spark of connection. He turned to the crowd. She's being hanged not because she stole a map, but because she saw one. Gideon's voice cracked. Lies. His hand twitched toward his coat. Clay planted his boot on the trapdoor. I got what you buried, Judge, he said, voice stone sober. And the truth's gonna hang heavier than this rope. Days after the halted hanging, Fort Despair buzzed with whispers, some called Clay a savior, others a troublemaker. Alara, freed but not absolved, felt the town's eyes, heavy as the news she'd escaped. She stayed in the old survey station, her cot and desk surrounded by maps pinned crookedly to the walls. Sleep was fitful, haunted by rope against skin and the stranger who'd stepped into her fate. Clay didn't leave. He stayed, fixing rails at the blacksmith's barn, talking to horses like they understood grief. He barely spoke to Alara, but his storm-dark eyes found hers often, guarding something unspoken. She didn't flinch, though it stirred something unfamiliar, something from before the fire that scarred her wrists. One night, after the saloon's lanterns dimmed, Clay walked her home. Silence hung comfortably until he broke it. You should get out of here. She stopped under the porch light, squinting through the heat. And go where? He looked at his boots, then the stars. Wherever you want, long as it ain't here. Fort Despair don't deserve you. He tipped his hat and vanished into the dark. Alara stood, cicadas humming, wondering why a man who'd stolen horses looked at her like she mattered more than the law. The next day, he came to the saloon early, before poker or music. Alara polished the counter, battling a stubborn smudge. You got sugar? He asked. For coffee? She poured a spoonful into his tin cup. He sipped, grimaced, nodded. You make it bitter. Maybe you bring out the worst in people, she teased, smirking. He chuckled, a broken sound that cracked something soft inside her. She leaned on the counter. Why are you really here, Clay? He stared into his cup, then met her gaze. I've been running my whole life. That night on the gallows, when you stood still in front of death, unafraid, I realized I didn't want to run anymore. Her throat tightened. She looked at her hands, burn marks faint but unyielding. She'd thought no man could look past them, but Clay looked at them, unflinching. That night, rain fell, bleeding into wood, smelling of forgiveness. Alara stood under the saloon's eaves, droplets hitting her shoulders. Clay joined her, hat tilted, shirt damp. You always stand in the rain like this? Only when I want to remember who I was before the fire. He stepped closer, arm brushing hers. You ever gonna tell me what happened? She swallowed, rain tracing her spine. One day. His hand hovered near hers, its heat palpable. You ever gonna stop running? He looked at the rain hitting the church bell. I might have stopped. Just don't know if I can stay. She smiled, the kind that hurt. Don't promise nothing you can't keep. They stood, two broken fence posts leaning just enough to not fall. Weeks passed. Clay stayed, sleeping in the stables, fixing saddles, helping with freight wagons. Alara laughed more, and townsfolk noticed. Might be you tamed that outlaw, Mrs. Jenkins said from her porch. Or he's fixing to tame you. Alara waved it off, but watching Clay hammer a latch under moonlight, sweat beading his temple, she wondered, what if she wasn't broken? What if she'd never met someone strong enough to stand with her? One night, Clay caught her humming a hymn her mama sang before the war. He leaned in the doorway. Sing that again. She flushed. You heard that? It was beautiful. Sounded like home. I ain't had a home in a long time, Clay. He stepped closer, quiet as dusk. Maybe we can build one. Her knees nearly buckled. Clay McKenna was no stranger, he was a roof in a storm, and her heart, buried beneath ash and loneliness, beat wildly, like a runaway horse finding home. Dawn brought calm. Clay stepped into Alara's survey station, water dripping from his coat, holding a silver scarf, his sister's, from the night he appeared. I don't need this yet, he said, but I'll wear it when I'm ready. She took it, the fabric cool between calloused fingers. Later, they stood at the cedar mine where Clay found the charred map. He lit a cracked lantern, its flame trembling. Put your ear down. Hear that? At first, only wind whistled through crevices. Then, a faint, rhythmic creak, like a heartbeat. They crawled into the shaft, air thick with mold and despair. Alara's compass guided her. Beneath a fallen beam, Clay unearthed a blackened box. Inside, photographs, letters, a silver chain, a pouch embroidered Eliza McKenna. Clay's breath hitched. My sisters. I thought I lost everything when they shot me. Alara knelt beside him. You remembered. You didn't let him win. They sat, lantern light fighting shadow, rain dripping through broken wood. The map, pouch, photographs, puzzle pieces aligning that eye in the town square, the gallows stood, a relic of fear. Captain Benedict arrived with 3 deputies from the territorial capital, faces stern but open to truth. Clay and Alara stepped onto the platform, placing the pouch and charred map on the rail. Evelyn Gideon hovered behind her husband, clutching letters, knuckles white. Clay's voice carried. "Judge Gideon, you taught Fort Despair standing here meant guilt. Truth ain't measured by rope or robes, it's scars and evidence. I got both." He held up the map. Alara drew the land, lines no man should cross. "You stole them, rewrote them, buried the truth." Evelyn stepped forward, voice torn. "His letters, confessing to taking funds, paying killers. I kept them to remind him of his shame." Silence fell, absolute. Gideon's hands shook. "Lies," he whispered, voice breaking. He bowed his head, shoulders shuddering. Evelyn laid a hand on his back. Benedict cleared his throat. "Your Honor, one chance. Trial in Tucson under federal authority." Gideon's gaze flickered to Clay's badge, then Alara's face, defiant, alive. "Never," he whispered, already broken. That afternoon, Gideon and Evelyn were escorted to a federal carriage, leaving tears and dust. Alara and Clay stayed on the platform as the sky turned pale blue. She held out her survey flag, red and gold. Maps change. Boundaries disappear. Clay unbuckled his badge, laying it beside the ribbon. "No more badges." "Not yet." She nodded. "When you're ready." The scaffold burned for 3 nights, its ashes a symbol of judgment undone. Fort Despair exhaled, streets alive with laughter and rebuilding. Alara redrew falsified maps, marking stolen lands and forgotten graves. The courthouse became a place of stories, the jail a shelter. Benedict, now sheriff, planted an oak where the gallows stood. Clay rode to the mesa each morning, eyes lighter with each sunrise. Alara watched from her porch, coffee in hand. "You look like you belong," she said. "I think I do," he replied. "At least I'd like to." Their bond wasn't romantic but deeper, 2 souls fractured by storms, finding a mirror that didn't judge. Clay's sister's locket sat in a frame in the community hall, beneath a plaque, "To those silenced, may your voices carry on the wind." A year later, Fort Despair was hope. The church rang with wedding bells, the saloon had a library corner, the jail grew vegetables. A sign stood at the town's edge, "Fort Despair, now a place of hope." Alara moved into the surveyor's cabin, painting it earth tones, her maps telling stories of restored lands. Clay lived quietly, helping with livestock, escorting children. One evening, he handed her a letter, his story, the truth. "I want someone to know. I trust you." She tucked it into her journal, her way of saying yes. Fort Despair's transformation wasn't seamless. Pain lingered in silences at town meetings, in empty chairs at dinner tables. Alara's cabin became a haven for those seeking answers, families asking about lost fence lines, elders tracing springs buried by time. Her maps, once tools of settlement, now wove stories of return, each line inked with purpose. Clay kept to the edges, his presence quiet but steady. He repaired wagons, taught children to bridle horses, and rode to the mesa at dawn. The townsfolk whispered of the cowboy ghost, but Clay never corrected them. His silence was his shield, his work his penance. One evening, Alara found him by the stables, whittling a stick into a horse figurine. "You're good with your hands," she said. "Better with a knife than a gun," he replied, not looking up. "Less trouble." She sat on a hay bale, watching him. "You don't talk about trouble, but it follows you." He paused, knife still. "Trouble's all I knew till I got here. Now I'm trying to figure out what comes after." She nodded, understanding the weight of starting over. "You ever miss it? The road, the running?" He met her eyes. "Sometimes. But then I see you, mapping out truth like it's a river you can follow, and I think maybe staying's worth a try." Her chest tightened. She handed him a small map, a sketch of the mesa. "For when you need to find your way back." He took it, fingers brushing hers, and tucked it into his coat. Winter brought snow, softening Fort Despair's scars. Alara's cabin glowed with lantern light, maps sprawling across her desk. Clay visited often, bringing firewood or stories of the road. One night, as snow fell, he arrived with a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed. "Found this in the stables," he said. "Old journal, from a surveyor before your time." She opened it, tracing faded ink. The entries spoke of land disputes, bribes, and Gideon's early schemes. "This is proof," she whispered. "More than the map." They took it to Benedict, who read it by candlelight. "This could reopen cases," he said. "Families run off their land, they deserve to know." The journal sparked a reckoning. Families returned, cautious but hopeful, reclaiming plots marked in Alara's maps. Native elders blessed the soil, their prayers mingling with smoke. Clay stood with them, hat in hand, listening. One afternoon, a woman approached Alara's cabin, her face weathered but kind. "You're the mapmaker," she said. "My father's land was taken. Can you find it?" Alara spread her maps, tracing lines to a valley north of town. "Here," she said. "It's yours again." The woman wept, clutching Alara's hands. Clay watched from the porch, his eyes soft. "You're giving them more than land," he said later. "You're giving them home." The oak in the square grew taller, its roots sinking deep. Benedict tended it daily, a ritual of redemption. The town, too, took root anew. Children played by the oak, their laughter drowning out the gallows' echo. The community hall, once a courtroom, hosted dances and storytelling nights. Alara and Clay attended one such night, the hall lit with lanterns. A girl read a poem about a tree that grew from ashes, and the crowd applauded. Clay leaned toward Alara. "That's us, ain't it? Growing from what burned." She smiled, her hand brushing his. "Maybe." After, they walked to the oak. Moonlight silvered its leaves. "I carved something," Clay said, pointing to faint initials, CM and AV, not as lovers, but witnesses. She traced them, her fingers steady. "You're leaving a mark." "So are you," he said. "Every map you draw." Spring brought wildflowers, blooming where cavalry boots once trampled. Alara's maps grew, each a story of restoration. Clay's letter joined the town records, his truth preserved. He rode less to the mesa, spending mornings teaching children to whittle, evenings with Alara, poring over maps. One night, under a sky of prairie stars, he spoke of a dream. A girl on a hill, laughing, holding a kite made of maps. "Sounds like someone you loved," Alara said. "Someone I let go." They stood by the oak, wind rustling like wings. "You're not running anymore," she said. He nodded. "I'm learning to stay." Years later, Fort Despair was unrecognizable, not in size, but spirit. The oak stood tall, a beacon of hope. Travelers heard of the cartographer who mapped justice and the silent man who never drew his gun. They saw the oak and, if they looked closely, two initials carved faintly, proof of two souls who stood in the desert and chose to rebuild. Alara's cabin was now a hub, her maps guiding families home. Clay built a small house by the stables, its porch facing the mesa. He wore the silver scarf again, a quiet promise kept. They never spoke of love, but their bond was a home built on trust, on shared scars and silences. One summer evening, children flew kites in the square, their laughter echoing. Alara and Clay watched, her maps tucked under her arm, his hand resting on the oak. "We didn't win," she said softly. "We survived." He looked at her, eyes clear. "That's enough to start." Fort Despair exhaled, no longer a place of endings, but of beginnings, where healing took root under a sky full of stars.